Nancy Kim, who uses she, her pronouns, is a Banana Slug alumni with a bachelor's degree from UC Santa Cruz in American Studies. She received her master's degree in Asian American Studies from UCLA and has worked in higher education for 25 years. Nancy also served as director of the Asian American Pacific Islander Resource Center at UC Santa Cruz. And prior to returning to UCSC,
Nancy Kim,
she was,
her pronouns, is a Banana Slug.
Sorry. Let me go ahead and mute that. Where was I? Prior to returning to UCSC, she was interim director at Pomona College Asian American Resource Center and taught Asian American Studies as adjunct faculty at UCSC, UCLA, CSU Northridge, and Scripps College. Thank you for being here, Nancy. Our next speaker here today is Professor Yiman Wang. Yiman Wang is a professor of film and digital media at University of California, Santa Cruz. She is the author of Remaking Chinese Cinema Through the Prism of Shanghai, Hong Kong, and Hollywood, which was published in Honolulu University of Hawaii Press in 2013. She is currently completing a monograph of Anna May Wang, the best known early 20th century Chinese American screen stage performer. She has guest edited a special issue for Feminist Media Histories on Asian feminist media and has published numerous articles in journals and edited volumes, including Quarterly Review of Film and Video, Film Quarterly, Camera Obscura, Journal of Film and Video, Positions, East Asia Cultures Critique, and Journal of Chinese Cinemas. Thank you so much for being here, Professor Wang. Next up, we have Professor L.S. Kim. L.S. Kim is an associate professor at the University of California, Santa Cruz in the Department of Film and Digital Media. Her research and teaching specialties include television history and theory, race and representation, Asian American cultural production, feminist criticism, and social change in both mainstream Hollywood and alternative media. Her manuscript, Made in Color, examines the figure of racialized domestic, housekeeper, maid, nanny across several decades and different ethnic identities as both upholding and negotiating social hierarchies in American television. She has written about race, class, gender, and genre in publications such as the Routledge Companion to Asian American Media, the Sage Handbook of Television, Flow TV, Journal of Film and Video, and Ms. Magazine. L.S. Kim graduated from Smith College with a major in government and a minor in film, and earned her MA and PhD degrees from the Department of Film and Television at UCLA. Professor Kim has taught at Northwestern University, Berkeley, UC Santa Cruz, UC Santa Barbara, and UCLA. She appears in the film Wonder Woman, The Untold Story of American Superheroines in 2012, and in Uploaded, The Asian American Movement, 2012, a documentary about Asian American artists utilizing new media and the internet. She currently serves on the Ms. Committee of Scholars and has served on the American Film Institute Television Awards jury. Welcome, Professor L.S. Kim. Next up, we have Angie Yang. Angie is a fourth-year student studying politics and feminist studies and graduating this winter. She is an intern within the UCSC Resource Center space at the APERC, Asian American Pacific Islander Resource Center, as well as the Women's Center. Additionally, she works within the space of diversity, equity, and inclusion at Electronic Arts. Her favorite movie of all time is Daddy Daycare, regardless of what the critics may say. Thank you, Angie, for being here. And last but not least, we have Alex Palines. Alex recently graduated last spring with a double major in politics and sociology. Soon after, he went on to pursue a career in film and has worked on a couple small music videos, as well as a feature-length film. He has also worked as a color corrector for a cosmetic company, and now he is currently pursuing jobs in the field of international education. All right, well, so that's all of the information that you have here today on all of our panelists. It's quite the degree here. So I hope you enjoy what you take away tonight from our panel discussion. So I'm just gonna go ahead and a few housekeeping rules. You can use the chat feature on the YouTube live stream page. Ask any questions that you might have for panelists. If questions spark up for you later on throughout the evening, feel free to put them in the chat and we will try to answer them as best we can. We hope you enjoyed the rest of Parasite Week, and you can always revisit the College's 9 and 10 YouTube channel for rewatching this video, sharing it with your friends and family, and watching several other videos on this channel as well regarding Parasite. And with that, we'll go ahead and get started. So welcome all of my panelists. So glad to have you here today. I'm gonna go ahead and pose my first question to y'all, which is very general. Any of you have any favorite scenes or characters? What about your what were your initial thoughts after watching the film Parasite? Did you have any initial reactions when Parasite took home four Oscar winning awards? I'll go ahead and leave that there. And if anyone would like to start.
I can start us off. So I watched Parasite Christmas 2018 with my entire family after eating dinner. And it was very much so one of those, like, no one knew what we were walking into, but we're all there full bellies watching this movie. And I walked away really confused. I walked away with a lot of, am I the parasite? And what systems am I the parasite? How do I fit into this world? What is this world? And I feel like that's something that the film does so beautifully. And I'm excited to learn from all of the esteemed panelists. Thanks, Erika, for sharing everyone's bio. But I'm really excited to learn from your point of view, what y'all took away from the film as well.
Maybe I can say something about my initial encounter with this film. Well, what I was most surprised by, or not really surprised, but what I found to be really interesting is that Parasite is probably the only film that I know that won both Cannes Award, the Palme d'Or, and the Best Picture, a number of Academy Award awards, right? So because these two camps don't usually agree with each other, and they tend to choose different films. One is more art house leaning, one is more popular leaning. But in this case, they actually see eye to eye, which really says something about this film, and in some ways its universal appeal to critics and to critics of different registers, right? So that's one thing that I find to be really interesting. But my initial impact with the film is confusion, because the film, usually we enter a film with certain expectations of, what kind of genre this is and what we expect from this kind of genre. And this film doesn't fit into any of this kind of genre. So I follow it, and then things just spiral out of control. And even when it's spiraled out of control, there's still this big dosage of black humor, which leaves you both confounded and laughing. And that's the sort of interesting initial reaction impact that I had, even till toward the end with the mayhem, where all the bodies are laid out dead. And at that point, I'm like, wow, this is for real. So the whole thing that just spiraled out of control and generating this different, the different kind of sentiments is really interesting. And I constantly think about what the film does by impacting the audience corporeally, and not simply in the kind of ideological message or a social political message it tries to impart, but really impacts the audience body corporeally in the theater or in the home space or whatever.
I think also in terms of what Professor Wang is saying, that two things really struck me and continue to strike me about the film. So as she said, Parasite is in some ways universally loved, right? It made such an impression across the globe. And so it is a curiosity to me, because on one hand, it is a very Korean film in some ways. And I wonder what the appeal is, and particularly last year, right? Because as Professor Wang said, the Academy Awards usually there's an expectation about, what will win. And so there was a certain surprise when Parasite took the accolades from films that were expected to win. And at the same time, so not to say that I was cynical about it, but very curious. What is it about Parasite that somehow American audiences could make it popular from? And then also, I certainly felt cultural pride, right? That a Korean director and that Korean performers and that a story set in a very particular kind of context would garner attention and respect. Secondly, as Professor Wang said, it is a really unusual filmic experience. Everyone knows there's this plot twist and that it moves between humor and horror. And the quality of the filmmaking, on so many levels is just so high. And so it was this surprise on a number of levels, cinematically, culturally. And then I think personally, I was, again, just very, very happy. It was, it kind of rippled through Asian American and Korean American communities as a triumph. And so with that, and I think part of what our panel might address is why is it so popular in the United States, for example? And if there is going to be attention given to Asian representation, why this film, Parasite?
Next. And thank you, Erika, for assembling this panel together with exceptional organizational abilities. My first impression, actually, I would say that I actually resisted watching this for a while because I didn't know anything about the film in terms of what the storyline was. The only thing I did know was that it was very suspenseful and kind of, somebody told me it was kind of like a horror genre, but it wasn't. And I don't really like that kind of genre, so I kind of resisted. And then after a certain point, I felt my Korean obligation to watch this film for my peoples. But I really enjoyed it. I mean, it's such a unique story with so many surprises. And of course, the class analysis, happens. And I was just really absorbed into the storyline. Of course, all the chaotic scenes. And the entire time I just felt like, in my head was saying, what is happening? What is going on? So it was very enjoyable. But I would say like the second time that I watched it, I was looking at more closely the gender dynamics of it and how women were represented. And I hope we can get into that kind of conversation a little bit because I know there's expertise in this group as well. But I started to look at well, first of all, just how they portrayed the 2T, the high school student, and these 20-something year old guys kind of getting involved with her was just very disturbing and ew. But also just how noticing that the gender roles with in the Park family was a little bit more restrictive and more traditional kind of gender roles, whereas there's more flexibility or fluidity in the with the Kim family. So I thought that was interesting. I hope we can kind of delve into that a little bit, but I'll stop there.
I think for me, the very first time I watched it was actually like February of 2020. So, and I knew about it mostly from like the buzz. I usually tend not to go to the movies for, I don't know. I don't know why, but I ended up watching it kind of like just at home with a couple of my friends. And obviously it was like, I knew kind of like it was going to be good. I knew like obviously kind of like the buzz around it, and like I was like completely like blown away. It was such like a good story, and like I think structurally like as like a film it was great, but I think it also really nailed a lot of like the themes that the director wanted to like addressed. Obviously, like the class system kind of like went through, and just Alice Kim, what you were saying about how like it kind of like got super popular in the U.S. I think it was super successful because it was like the themes and like the story was able to translate outside of like Korea, which I think is super interesting because I think a lot of like a lot of films kind of like their stories are based around whatever like their kind of like whatever country that they're in, and all of our like the country's culture, and obviously the economic situations of like the US and Korea are completely different, but I think it did a really good job of translating both economic systems of like poverty as well as like poverty and like people in a place of like privilege as well, and like just high economic status. I think it did a really good job of like translating both issues that kind of like was that everyone from around the world was able to like kind of understand. So and I like watched it. I did a rewatch, and I think it was really interesting kind of see the subtleties of like how massively rich the family was, and I can get to that later. So yeah.
Well, thank you all for giving your thoughts so far. Alex, is there anything you want to add before we move on to the next question?
Yeah, it was actually kind of funny how I first saw the film. I didn't watch it until after it won the Oscar nomination. I think that was, I could be misremembering, but I think that was around December of 2019. And I saw it with my parents in Santana Row before I came back down to go back home for the season. And it was really ironic in a sense because the movie theater in Santana Row, if I remember correctly, is actually really nice. So I was able to get a beer and like have a large popcorn and these really fancy seats watching a film about classism and class struggles with my parents, who I am very fortunate to have, and we do well, fortunately. So it was kind of ironic, but because I had that sociology background, I was able to grasp the concepts behind the film very quickly and recognize all this all the symbolism in the film. What was really interesting though, after finishing the film and coming out of it, I did overhear a lot of the people who were also in the audience talking about how it was like such a crazy film and they can't believe that all these people died, and like they couldn't understand why people were doing these things. And I'm like, that makes a lot of sense why you completely missed the point, because I'm watching this in Santana Row, which is a very like fancy, nice, wealthy, rich area. And yeah, also to answer your question about my favorite character, I loved, hopefully I don't butcher this, but Ki Jung, she's the daughter of the Park family, if I'm saying that, or no, not, yeah. The daughter of the Porter family, I liked her especially well because she kind of symbolized at least to me, the possibility of a not lesser, but like a less well-off family or person being able to potentially grow higher in the social ladder, because there's a specific scene where the entire family is at the house while the rich family is out. She's in the bathtub, and then her brother notices, and then he comments later on that to his parents that they should have seen her in that bathtub because it looked like she belonged there. And it's she had a lot of symbolism, which I loved, because she also showed that in her ability to her artistic abilities forging that document for her brother, as well as her very quick memorization and acting skills to, I guess, con her way into the family as a art therapy teacher. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much for all of your insight to Parasite. insight to Parasites. So that's kind of everyone's initial reactions to the film. I'm hearing a lot of different reactions here of how we felt the film was portrayed to us initially when we first watched it, and then how we felt after we saw it win at the Oscars. So that kind of leads me to my next question, is just like, what was it about Parasite that allowed it to be so well received in America, enough to become the first non-English language film in Oscar history to win the award for Best Picture? Do we think that politics had something to do with it? Feel free to take that question as you like.
I can start a little bit. I'm also kind of thinking about it in the context of the popularity of Korean culture right now. Korean dramas are incredibly popular. K-pop BTS is, incredibly popular. So I think that there's a lot more consideration because of just the general, the acceptance of Korean culture and popular and media in that way. But I also want to put it in context of what's happening with Asian American films, because of, for example, the movie that's out right now, Minari, was nominated in the Golden Globe Awards as a foreign language film, and not as and was not qualified as the best film category. And so it made me think about the acceptance of Asians as foreigners still in that kind of frame. And still a resistance to looking at Asian Americans who have complex identities and experiences and can speak non-English as still American. And then I also think about it in terms of the popularity of Crazy Rich Asian and still fitting this model minority myth, model minority image, and the popularity of in line with that, the reality shows House of Ho, I think, and then also Bling Empire, which is a new on Netflix, which I can't even get through the first episode, which is just ridiculous. And so I think it just emphasizes this pigeonholing of Asian Americans in this model minority, and East Asians in particular, East Asian Americans in this model minority construct that prevents us to be portrayed in complex ways. That kind of allows Asians in Asia to be in film.
I think Nancy raises a really important point about the film's reception, in the West, and not just reception, but acceptance. There is an aesthetic, right, to Asianness that is preferred or appealing. And as Nancy said, Asian Americanness is still somehow illegible, right? It's not as readable, it's not as knowable, it's confusing. But Asians from somewhere else, produced somewhere else, is something that is more easily understood and brought into American culture, right? It's still a foreign object, and the characters are foreigners. But back to the idea of aesthetic. Well, the look of the film, right, is so appealing. I mean, it's incredibly well constructed, right? Cinematically, it's stunning. We know the work of the director, who also earned an Academy Award, is so meticulous. But even though the film is a deep critique, right, of class inequality, it still is really beautiful. There still is, right, this fetishization and this idealization of the architecture, for example, the house and the home of the Parks, which is a set. Some of you are probably fans and you've done some digging. It wasn't really an actual modernist house. So it was all carefully set constructed. And I do think that even though the lives and the kind of the cluelessness and the smugness of the Park family holds an aesthetic that is so visually, right, appealing and attractive, and that somehow that represented Korean life also to viewers. And that was very seductive. I mean, right, it's 50 plus years after the Korean War. So this is a new image for some, I mean, not for Asian Americans or Korean Americans, but of Korea. And so they could see and accept Korea and Korean life looking like that. And then my other key point about its reception and its popularity that is very curious to me is it is this criticism of class stratification that we have in the United States. And yet we're much more comfortable, right, seeing it played out in another country, in another culture, with other characters. And so that strange kind of displacement, like as Americans, we can feel good about that story and that critique and deflect our own, right, kind of self-examination here. It's a neat package. You know, it looks really great. It is understandable, right? The tragic moral of that tale. And at the same time, and I think we'll talk about it later, Professor Wang referred to the ending of the film as this mayhem, this kind of shocking ending and this mix of genres. But that's a film that would never be made, right, in Hollywood or in the US. And so I think, you know, there's a way in which as American and Western viewers, we can kind of buy into the critique. It looks good, you know, until the end when there's all this blood, even though it is kind of exaggerated and certainly cinematic and melodramatic. But that I think there are probably mixed feelings, right, about how the film ends, because in the West, we're used to a happy ending, and this was not a happy ending. And so I'm just curious how far the critique is accepted by the West, and what are the elements of Parasite that made it so appealing, right? So what do American audiences remember about it and love about it, and what do they kind of just, you know, move away from or turn away from?
So I agree with everything that Professor Kim and Nancy said about this film's popularity and acceptance by the American public. And I also can't help just trying to compare this film with the stunning success of Ang Lee's Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon from, is it 20 years ago? Is that right? And that was, that won the best foreign picture. It was still called best foreign picture. Now it's best international film, right? 20 years ago. And it had to be the foreign picture because it was made in Mandarin Chinese with extremely heavy accent, but that's a totally a separate topic. So over the 20 years, you know, Academy has been sort of trying to refashion its own image. Right. So in other words, if we're thinking about the politics of Academy, you know, especially because of a lot of the criticism of it being white male dominated. So in the recent years, it has tried to portray itself as a more inclusive kind of entity, and it has expanded its board of you know, jurors and so on, in trying to project this image of becoming more updated and becoming more attuned to the present day politics of equity and social justice and so on. So in some ways, I think the success of Parasite being able to win the Best Picture award along with all these other awards and not being relegated to the Best Foreign Picture award, right? I think that success has to do with the way that the director is able to hit the sweet spot, right? And it's a sweet spot of, you know, breaching the issue of class disparity, social inequity, and how the underclass people rely upon their own resourcefulness and trying to make their way upward, but ultimately fails. But that film ends with this beautifully shot fantasy from the son's perspective of not only the family reunion, but the family occupation of this beautiful modernist house, which is a set, as Professor Kim said, right? So there's so many twists in here in the process of addressing the issue of social disparity that I think, it becomes a cultural, it becomes an object that, the good object that crystallizes all this cultural capital, that when Academy Award was granted to the film, the Academy is able to lay claim to the diversity discourse, say, hey, we actually consider foreign language film equally eligible for the Best Picture category, and we actually care about social disparity, class disparity. We are socially, politically conscience, right? They have this kind of the claim that's being gratified. That's one thing. And the other thing is precisely the irony that Professor Kim also gestured toward, which is, the social critique is hybridized with the aesthetics, the extremely beautiful look of the wealthy house, the wealthy family's house, right? It's modernist and it's sterilized, right? So it's that kind of a seductive aesthetics that even though it's when it's aligned with the wealthy family, it's criticized as their a signal of them exploiting the working class and being oblivious to the working class suffering. So it's being criticized on that level, but at the same time, ironically, it is also appreciated for its beauty fetishization, right? Professor Kim says, that is so important. So I think, that's what I mean by the sweet spot that Bong Joon-ho, the director, is able to nail. And that just allows him to speak to the American public. And also, I think he, before this film, he had done collaboration or co-production with America in Okja and also in Snowpiercer, right? So he's very savvy in the way that he is able to narrativize and visualize the story so that it appeals across the board, I think.
I know folks were talking about the Park's house and kind of the fetishization, kind of the spectatorness of the house itself, and it made me think about it's super interesting to see because if we look at Korea, kind of and I'm speaking generally, but a lot of I noticed that the Park family, that's the richer family, yes, is kind of a bit westernized. There's a lot of influences of Western culture. Obviously, the family wants to knows English and wants their daughter to learn English, which is really interesting, as well as kind of that modernist style, which is very much a Western style of architecture, which is super interesting. And this is not necessarily Western, but it's kind of in my own perspective that I noticed in my rewatch is that this when Ki-taek, the father, first comes to meet the father of the Park family. It's at the company, and I noticed that the company had virtual reality sets. This is a super minor thing, but since I don't do virtual reality in particular, but in my program in grad school, virtual reality is a big thing. And it's for me, it's shown out because virtual reality, the tech and also kind of the experience of virtual reality is incredibly expensive. Kits like these cost thousands of dollars, and as well as the space and all that. Super minor thing, but I just thought it was really interesting seeing a little bit of his company and me just noticing oh, he's doing VR stuff. Obviously, we don't get to see what exactly he does, but just from my own perspective, I thought it was really interesting. And kind of it's interesting to see kind of people watching it get the kind of the tones of classism and all that, but kind of step away from it. And this is kind of also another term that I use in interactive media, which is the magic circle, about once you leave kind of the entertainment space, whether it is a game or a movie, you kind of forget, and you see the lessons you learn in that entertainment that you watch is forgotten, which I think a lot of people are doing, just being oh wow, like rich people suck, and then like 2 minutes later they forget about it. I think one of the clear points of it is that like seeing like kind of like the memes on Twitter. I think recently I literally just saw, I think it was Chrissy Teigen say like talk about like something that's very like out of touch with like people who are like out of touch to like people who aren't like super rich, and people kind of like posting that one like image of the father in the car with like his face just like downstruck and annoyed as like the mother of the Park family is just talking about like literally first world problems. That photo, that like image in the car is just like a great reminder when people like talk about the film and then on the other hand kind of like talk about stuff that are like very first world or like, you know, rich people problems. I use those in quotes.
Any thoughts from Angie or Alex before I move on?
I feel like I am learning so much more than anything. I am like now mid-conversation coming to understand the film so much better than I came in pre-conversation. I feel so lucky to be able to sit on a little panel with all of y'all smart people. But kind of going to what Professor Wang mentioned about the director being able to hit that sweet spot, and the reaction I had as a viewer watching that sweet spot come, and I'm actually reading some of the comments that people are leaving in this in the live stream, is talking about what is happening when you're moving from a comedy, and when it just gets to like, okay, this is a comedy, never mind, we're in a thriller, and when it just gets to we're in a thriller, never mind, we're in a horror, and the jumping back and forth of emotions, it keeps you at the edge of your seat. But that is what is so beautiful about it, and because you can truly never get into the film, but at the same time the film is talking to these problems that yes affect Korean society, but affects American society just the same, is what is so beautiful about the entire space. And I also like how as the film progresses, the boundaries of private and public life, as the two families get more integrated with each other, as they get to know each other more, we see this boundary between like what is private, what is public, what we keep to ourselves, what we show, starts to break apart.
Yeah, I also wanted to add that I think part of the reason why the West kind of attached or was drawn to this film is because there's a lot of parallels in between this film and Western culture. So, for example, you could see in both the Kim and the Parks that they're nuclear families. You could also, going back to Colette's point about the patriarch of the rich family working in a VR company, that's very reminiscent of what we'd assume or imagine Silicon Valley is like, where there's a lot of technology that we don't understand, and there's a lot of rich people, and everything's just going so fast, and they barely even take a look at these poorer families, which is why the Parks were the Kims were able to kind of finagle their way into getting everyone a job. There's also another parallel would be the classism between the two families, which has been mentioned a lot and is the most obvious thing. And I think that sentiment is growing in this society because the gap between the rich and the poor is still growing, and it feels like it's growing exponentially. And I feel like that's just a shared sentiment both in this film and in Western culture. So yeah, there's just a lot of parallels between this film and Western culture that I feel like people don't consciously think about, but they just subconsciously latch onto. So.
Well, thank you all so much for your insight to that question. I appreciate that. So I'm actually going to take us on a small little detour to talk about something a little bit more lighthearted. We'll go ahead and show a scene from the film Parasite, in which there's this beautifully choreographed cinematic montage, beautiful choreography, in my opinion, of a scene where the Park family is on their way back from an interrupted camping trip because of the rain. And we will get into environmental racism and climate change a little bit later. But for right now, the montage shows them asking Mrs. Kim if she can make Ramadan for her son because their camping trip was spoiled due to the rain. So this is the least that they could do to make up for that feeling. So we're going to go ahead and show a scene of that montage from the film, beautifully portrayed, and then we'll talk a little bit more about how Ramadan is significant in the film.
여보세요?
저기 아줌마, 짜파구리 할 줄 아시죠?
짜파구리?
짜파구리라고 다송이가 제일 좋아하는 건데 지금 바로 물 올리시면 시간 딱 맞겠네. 냉장고에 한우 체크살도 있으니까 그것도 좀 넣으시고.
아, 그러면 저 캠핑장은?
완전 난리 났었어요. 생난리. 캠핑장 계곡물이 불어가지고 다들 텐트 철수하고 아수라장인데 다송이는 집에 안 간다고 울고불고 버티고. 아무튼 도착 즉시 짜파구리. 알겠죠?
그럼 지금 거진 다 오신 건가요?
8분 후 도착으로 나오네, 내비에는.
8분 후 도착.
전화 끊고 바로 물부터 올리세요. 파이팅!
짜파구리가 뭐야?
야, 이거.
오셨어요? 다송아, 저거 봐. 우리 짜파구리 먹자. 짜파구리.
Okay, well, that's our scene there of the beautifully choreographed montage of making Ramadan. So my question to you all is, what's the significance of Ramadan in the story, and how do you interpret its symbolic role?
Well, I guess I can go. Well, first off, Ramadan is great. I'm also a big food person, so I kind of I've been trying to make it. It's actually super easy, but I'll get into that right now. But the significance of Ramadan is and there's a lot of articles all over about just kind of the conjunction of both literally that kind of their classes coming together, because Ramadan or chapaguri, which is it is a mixture of two instant noodles together, cheap instant noodles, and then combined with obviously the steak cubes. But what's significant is that I don't remember if it's said, but it's implied that the type of meat is incredible. It's a high grade type of meat, which shows up in their house, and obviously it's just super the meat is intended to be really, really nice. And it is obviously kind of a conjunction of the poor man's food, which is instant noodles. We've all had instant noodles, whether it is the two instant noodles that's shown there or anything else. And then kind of combined with kind of like a really high grade steak. So it kind of like blurs the line of like, you know, the like kind of like I said, the poor man's food with like a really high grade meat. Yeah.
I think the scene also, or the sequence rather, is intended to show that because previous to this, the Kim family has taken over the Park family's home, right? Imagining that this is their life. And they are indulging in high quality alcohol and really rich foods that they otherwise would not be able to. And it all comes, right? I mean, they're having this incredible party and it all comes to a sudden halt. They have 8 minutes, right, to get back into reality where they're cleaning and serving. And the contrast between, you know, kind of the emotional experience of the Kim family that suddenly takes a turn because of the Parks families. I mean, right, they're generally shown to be without awareness, right, about their demands and their interests and their requests. And so the little boy wants this, as Collette says, you know, kind of this poor man's food, poor person's food. And the mother is still, right, performatively trying to demonstrate kind of her class privilege by saying, well, make the noodles and put in the sirloin, right? As if he is a prince and we need to doctor up this soup and do it in 8 minutes. And, you know, she acts as if this request is, you know, not anything, is not the intrusion and shock to reality that it is. And so there's also the contrast, not only in the food request, but in the family's relationship to what's at stake, literally, right, in making that and preparing that dish. And we also get, right, the emotional turn, plot turn in the film, because now everything starts building, and the Kim family is more and more. That was kind of like the last moment of pleasure. Now it's on the other side, and they are needing to defend themselves and conceal themselves, and we don't know what direction the story is going to go.
I also wanted to point out, and thank you, Alice, for bringing up about how the mother is trying to be performative and cater to the son, who's portrayed as this potentially genius artist, and yet. I don't know if you caught it, if folks caught it a little bit later on in the film, but that the sister of this artist, this genius, complains that the mother didn't even offer food to her. So in some ways, she's so kind of invisible in that family, which I thought was real interesting. The other thing that came up for me was, I mean, the kick. Of the housekeeper down the stairway was very shocking, but it also brought up the violence, the intra-class violence between the family, between the housekeeper and her husband and the Kim family, in trying to just establish themselves and get a little bit of what they can in terms of any kind of economic or just surface level privilege or a taste of the upper class family. So I thought that was interesting, and how that has really like escalated and so chaotic at that point.
You know, this is really interesting discussion, and I found that scene, like Erika, you said, it's so beautifully edited and choreographed, right? It's really like a dance, but it's a dance filled with potential violence or actual violence, right? So a couple of things that I want to say in relation to the rundown It's, even the term itself, I know it's a translation of the Korean word. I don't know exactly what the Korean word means, but this is going back to what I was saying earlier about how the director is able to hit the sweet spot, right? So, something that is very specifically Korean, then through the translation massage process, it becomes ramdam. It conveys the ramen and udon, the kind of hybridization. So that's one. But also, interestingly, I think the editing is the magic touch here, right? And the whole idea of how all of a sudden within 8 minutes, Professor Kim highlights, right? There's only 8 minutes, like last minute rescue, which is very conventionally employed in Hollywood editing. So in this last minute or last 8 minutes rescue, you have all these participants or the actors sort of funneled into different job lines, and yet at the same time they're intercut. So there is this one interesting shot when the mother is busy cutting up the sirloin into the cubes, and then she turns on the faucet, the water is dripping through the faucet. And through that shot, it's almost through the water flow from the faucet, you see the father grabbing the basement man and, twisting his arms literally and dispatching him downstairs into that dungeon down there, right? So that shot is so miraculous. You have her cutting, the mother cutting the sirloins, and then the two men are engaged in this extremely violent life and death combat, right? So the notion that I jumped into my mind is rendering, in terms of rendering the meat into, cutting the meat into, cutting the sirloin into an ingredient for the ramdam, the rendering of that. And also the rendering of the life bodies into objects that can be just thrown around and disposed of, right? The kind of violence that's carried between these different scenes and different characters, activities, and different spaces, right? And then they're all sort of conjoined. And what's also interesting is, two other things. I'll try to be brief. One is the idea of concoction, right? So the ramdam is a concoction. So the mother housekeeper initially has no idea what that is. So she immediately, goes to the phone and Google what it is, and then just cook up that recipe. So it's a concoction. In other words, it's fakery of some kind of dish. And then it really dovetails with the main theme of the film is about faking it until you make it. Except in this case, the structure is such that they cannot make it, right? But the whole idea of faking is so very much already emblematized in this very, concoction of these noodles. And also, following this ramdam thing is not done yet in this scene, right? Because following that, Nancy, you mentioned that the daughter complains that mother did not offer this to her, but she did not have this complaint earlier. And it's a critical point is that the boy from the working class family is hiding under her bed, and then the dog sniffs him out. And then the camera shot is frames the boy hiding in the foreground under the bed, and then the daughter of the wealthy family sort of comes off the bed, and then she lifts the bedding. It's not clear whether she actually sees the boy in hiding, but then she immediately exits her room to argue with her parents about something she never even wanted in the first place. So to me, she actually sees the boy in hiding, and she's creating an opportunity for him to sneak out. So that's something that I find to be really interesting, that can we sort of expand that to think that in some ways, the daughter of the wealthy family, who most of the time has been so invisible, right, as Nancy, you said, but she actually is in possession of some kind of knowledge. She's not, she's privy to something that she's not espousing to her family. And that I find to be really interesting, in the whole intrigue of complicity. The Kong family infiltrate into this wealthy family. They get along. They get so far without being outed. It seems like there is some kind of complicitous relationship there.
I agree. And it also speaks to the question about, will class lines or can class lines be crossed? And so, we always have this kind of Romeo and Juliet thematic universal. Will they be a romantic couple? Will it be a legitimate, right, connection? Is the daughter allying herself, at least in some small emotional way, right, with the side of the poor, if you will, Kim family, as opposed to her own rich family, where she probably has experienced for years, right, certain kind of hypocrisies and emptiness. I think what's also interesting about Parasite and its popularity is, I think for non-Korean audiences, there really is an absence of history. There's no explanation. And the film doesn't explicitly give it as well as to why are the Parks so wealthy. I mean, Collette says, he works for some VR company, but we don't really know, the background. And similarly, right, why are the Kim family in such a difficult position? And I think, in some ways, there is just the utter arbitrariness, right? There's always the question, why are there wealthy people? Why are there poor people? What is their relationship to each other? And so there does seem to be no explanation given or offered. And that's why we don't see, right, any kind of justification or the notion or the feeling of justification for the Parks' way of being. And we don't necessarily, we feel for the Kim family, but there isn't also an explanation as to how they found themselves in the situation. There's a general understanding, again, of post-war, and then kind of the development of the middle class, or the striving of middle-class families to get into businesses, but then they fall into debt, like the housekeeper and her husband. So it's curious about why. And since we're not completely sure, we begin to wonder about allyship. And so then when the daughter is perhaps gesturing towards, right, an allyship with the Kim family, I think as audience members, we wonder, is this some kind of answer, right, to class division, that maybe there will be integration and, if you will, intermarriage, and it'll all just kind of blow over? Or, right, is it just inevitable that there will always be just kind of an oppressive, wealthy, upper class 10%, 1%, and there will always inevitably be, right, an underclass? And there again is the idea that this film doesn't give us a happy ending, unless, there are those people who want to interpret Kevin or Kiwoo's fantasy at the end as reality. But I think, to speak to Professor Wang's point about the mixture of bodies and food, also made me think about, kind of like appetites and desire, and what are the appetites that are being whetted on the part of the daughter by the entrance of the Kim family into, right, the Park household. And then we have a comment in our last quick note. We have a comment in our YouTube chat about the boy came home and he didn't even eat that Ramadan.
Well, thank you all. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I did notice during that scene when I was rewatching it that it was kind of weird to see that they had an entire fridge of just meats, and I'm gonna assume specifically sirloin, which is traditionally a very expensive meat that is supposed to be a lean meat that is very rich in protein but not too much in fat, but it's still flavorful, at least if I'm remembering correctly. Versus the ramen and the udon packets being in a very small drawer. It seems like they have more of an excess of these richer foods stored, rather than the poorer food, the cheaper foods, there you go, we'll say. and I think it's weird because it feels like they kind of almost fetishize a poor lifestyle, because if we go back a little bit later in that scene where the husband and the wife are sleeping on the couch and they are sexualizing this weird fantasy that they came up with about how the driver had some sort of hookup in the back of in the back of the car, and how there was probably cocaine involved because she only left her panties instead of like an earring or something like that. And the wife was trying to perform. She was saying like, "Oh, buy me drugs," as a weird. That was really off-putting during that scene when they were trying to like when they were you know, basically playing around, and it was, I don't know, it was a weird fetishization thing that I pointed out.
Right, as Alex is saying, they're fantasizing about being, you know, poor or in need of money. That also feeds into their sets of desires and appetites.
And it's also very analogous with the young boys fantasizing of being a Native American, right? You know, playing with the TV, the outfit and arrows and everything, right? It's a racial masquerade through and through. And that's something, you know, also really remarkable or really sticking out about this film. And I always wonder, you know, how the American public interpret that scene, but so far the readings that I've seen don't really talk about that much.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot to unpack in several of these scenes, you know, starting with, you know, first the turning point, which is the Ramadan scene where the rain starts to come and, you know, their plans. The movie ideally, or not ideally, but basically changes its tone from that point on, from the discovery of the people in the basement, and from there on out, the movie really changes its tone from being, you know, just what it was in the beginning, the first half of the film. So there's a lot of different topics that we can, you know, talk about tonight, but we have about half an hour left. So I want to, you know, address that, you know, some of the main themes in Parasite. We notice that, you know, there's definitely, the film touches on capitalism. It touches on classism, class warfare. It touches on, you know, cultural appropriation and ignorance. And it also touches on environmental racism and climate change. So what we're going to do now is show you all the video, a clip from the scene, clip from the film of the downpour and the Kim family trying to figure their lives out during this downpour.
뭐해 거기서? 빨리 와 빨리.
이게 뭐야?
여기 그냥 있어요. 여기 똥물이야 똥물. 창문이 열려 있었나 보네. 이거 좀 도와줘. 야, 내가 그래. 기호야. 야, 기호야. 창문 닫아, 창문.
아주 좋아. 가만히 있어봐. 가만. 아씨 어지럽네.
기정아, 조심해. 이게 아무거나 만지지 마.
여보, 나 확실히 내진 땅인가 봐. 당신이 안 보여. 동생의 언니가 진짜 좋은 분인데 나를 발로 밀었어. 나 따라해봐. 충수.
야, 기호야. 뭐하냐 거기서? 어?
Okay, so through that scene, we get a little bit of a hint of what the ending will amount to. But I want to talk about, I want to pose a question to you all. We see this, we see how the complete and stark contrast between the Kim family's experience with this downpour, with this storm, versus the Parks family's experience. For them, what is a minor inconvenience is for the Kim a horrible uplifting, uprooting of their home, a destruction of their half basement home that causes them to have to seek shelter, gather their belongings, see their home in ruins. But for the Park, it's a minor inconvenience that actually clears up the pollution. So that's something that, we take away from the hints and symbolism that director Bong Joon-ho put into the film Parasite regarding climate change and environmental racism. So my question is to you
Erika,
all.
really quick. The stream got blocked due to copyright issue.
Oh no.
Yeah, I'm trying to get it back right now, but
Okay.
it seems playing that clip on stream flagged YouTube's algorithm.
Oh boy.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So we're not live?
We are not live right now.
Okay. So helpful tip for future panels. Don't show movie clips on YouTube.
I guess one clip was okay, or they might do it by the length of the clip too.
I think we're back.
Oh, okay.
I was gonna say, let's just try to reload. Are we back?
I think we're back. If chat, are we back, chat?
Okay.
I think we're good.
Back on. So my question to, I don't know if how much of that was heard after the clip was aired, but I was discussing the mild inconveniences that the Park family faced versus the horrible situation the Kim family was in with their home being destroyed and living in the half basement, completely flooded their home, whereas the Park family did not have that same experience. So leads us to question, where do we see this symbolism of climate change? What do you think director Bong Joon-ho is trying to tell us about environmental racism? How do you see this in your daily lives? I'll open it up to all panelists.
I think what's really interesting about that scene is not only is the rain just a minor inconvenience, but it becomes something fun for the son. He's having fun in it. This is a great thing that is happening to his day. It's saving his camping trip. Like, yay, how fun when people are losing their homes. So I think that's just a very interesting juxtaposition. And then also what I saw in that scene was when the Kim family was in their home trying to find what brings value to them. You have the father going through and finding the mother's medals. And then you also have the daughter in that very same scene finding like an escape to reality through her cigarettes, maybe a key to normalcy, or just like escaping what she was surrounded by. She sits on the toilet, gets above the level of the sewage line, and just smokes. And then the son, it almost seems like the rock came back to him. But the son finds, like, I don't know what the rock really means. I really read it as kind of a promise or a dream of getting out of the financial situation that he was born into. But you see him just come back to this rock once again. So I found that really interesting. Amongst everything else happening, you see the Kim family still go back to these little items.
I mean, the intercutting visually, narratively, literally shows, right, at least the three different perspectives, the Kim family, the Park family, and the housekeeper and her husband. But symbolically too, the ways that those characters are responding in this crisis moment, although it's not a crisis for the Parks or the little boy, demonstrate, right, their relationship to, as Erika calls it, kind of the environmental racism. It's also certainly classism, right? Because the whole kind of infrastructure of the city is set up in such a way that the Kim family live in the bowels, and all the sewage literally runs off into their space, and away from the space of the Parks neighborhood. I think for all of us, what was incredibly moving and disturbing is when the housekeeper's husband, right, is flashing Morse code, help, help, and the little boy just, and yes, he is a child, but he is symbolic of the Park family. It's play. It's a game for him, and it's life and death for the others. And so we have these three literal cinematic perspectives and what they represent. But again, I am always curious about kind of a non-Korean audience. I mean, they can read the symbolism, but I don't know how much of, kind of the socio-historical they understand in terms of the criticism, the social critique, the inability for there to be social mobility. And I am also curious how Korean audiences, right, or different audiences in different class strata in Korea, how they respond to the film.
I think one thing I noticed, and I know not all of it was kind of shown in the scene, but I think it's super interesting, and it kind of goes back to your point, Ellis, about about how, this kind of class struggle between like the lower income families and then just like against like the rich family. I think it's really interesting how those two families could have easily unionized, got together to like essentially just be all parasites to this family. Like the housekeeper could have just continued sneaking in and giving her husband food, while the Kim family could have just like easily just went on with their lives. And I think it's an interesting reflection of how this survival of the fittest, of just like this weird capitalistic idea of like everyone for themselves, and like this idea that like these like lower income families just don't need to like work together. And it's super interesting how also like the housekeeper's husband like basically idolizes the father, the patriarch of the family, just for no reason besides like, oh, he's giving him like shelter, when that's not necessarily the case, which I think seems like it's an interpretation of like how some people from like not who aren't like in that 1% idolize those people in the 1% in a kind of like meritocracy, as in like I can be there because I can like idolize. They idolize it because it's like I can work hard enough. This idea of like meritocracy and like this grind culture, I guess, about like, working just hard enough to be there. I'm just thinking about like how this weird idolization of Elon Musk for some reason, of just like he literally kind of doesn't care, or like he probably doesn't know who you are. Why are you idolizing him? Kind of idea, which is something I've noticed when, just his housekeeper is just like, thank you. And then like when he finally meets Mr. Park, when he's like dying, he's like, thank you, I love you. And Mr. Park's like, who are you? Which is like super interesting.
So I was intrigued by what Collette says about, they could all just be parasites and all get along well. Did that capture what you were indicating at some point?
Yeah, it's just kind of like using like the general term, but like literally kind of just, it's this weird idea of like, honestly, like these, like obviously we don't know the backstory of the housekeeper at all. It wasn't necessarily really explored about like where she comes from, but obviously they're like kind of have these jobs and getting these, basically they're getting money from like the richer family, which I guess they could have everyone in that situation could have benefited from it, but they chose not to.
Well, yeah, so that's super interesting, right? That really goes to the heart of democracy. And what is democracy? Is it about, what defines democracy? Is it the distribution of the wealth across to everybody, and everybody is deserving, and society and the state should invest in everybody? Right? Or is it always dependent upon some kind of a hierarchical structure? And that goes back to what Erika was saying about environmental racism and injustice, right? And also reminds me of a 1920 silent film by Fritz Lang called Metropolis. And that film is also extremely vertically laid out, literally with the empowered people being on top of the metropolis, whereas the menial workers are sort of bottom and underground. But the film ends with this utopic vision, which is precisely what Collette you articulate. That is, the metropolis. Metropolis also refers to the female robot who is born and then oath made, and then she has the ability to bring back the wealthy and the poor and literally join their hands together, right? But that's considered a utopic vision. And in real life, right, what we're looking at is this entrenched hierarchy, whether it's racialized hierarchy, colonialist politics, which also produces its own host of hierarchies or class hierarchy, right? The society around the world is structured around these hierarchies. So as a result of that, I think what this film is doing is really powerful in showing how the classes contrast with each other in what they have, right? But at the same time, the way the editing works is precisely, as Professor Kim says, intercut them together so that you literally have the mirror images of these haves and have-nots. And visually, they are almost similar, right? When the Morse code light is flashing from the wealthy boy's perspective, on the other side, on the poor family, their electricity supply is fading, so their lights is also flashing, right? So visually they look like mirror images to each other, but precisely in that kind of visual analogy, the contrast and the hierarchy comes out to be even more reinforced, right? So the environmental racism and environmental classism, really, right, is really very much pronounced through this kind of cinematic language. But what's also interesting is the idea of plan and pleasure, right? So this was the clip was at the point where it was after, they were running away from the wealthy family all the way down with the water also flowing down with them. One wonders whether there's some kind of a Christian reference of the deluge, and then is there an ark that's appearing on the horizon, or are these people going to be disposed? They're not going to be on the ark at all because you're disposed of, right? So that's one thing. But at that point, the father says to the son and daughter, saying that, don't worry, I've got a plan. And the son at the same time says, don't worry, I'm going to take care of all of this. So this is after they were talking about the planning. At the same time, we know that their plan, after having succeeded spectacularly, has also unraveled spectacularly, right? This is the point where everything is unraveling. So, and then the father later on, after this in the gym, in the evacuation site, the father says, well, the only way, the best plan is actually no plan, because then you cannot be screwed in any way, right? So what's interesting here is, how they come to the realization, talking about environmental racism and injustice, how they finally come to realize that the injustice is structural. No matter how much they try to plan, they're going to be upended. Therefore, their only resolution for that or remedy is to have no plan at all. And that sort of manifested in the daughter, sitting perched on top of the toilet, just shuts herself off and takes a drag, right? And then these other family members are trying to rescue whatever is valuable to them, but the notion that jumps into my mind, and allow me to introduce that notion, because I actually just taught this film in my graduate seminar, and we read Lauren Berlant's book, Cruel Optimism, for this film. I'm sorry, it's my cat. So one of the terms Lauren Berlant uses is scavenger enjoyment, precisely to talk about the impossibility of upward mobility. And then what you have left is the voided fantasy. And the way to get by is to scavenger enjoyment. And that's what I see to be literalized in the scene, right, where the daughter, just tries to escape through taking the drag, and other family members are scavenging whatever they can from the water. And then shortly after this, after they escape, there is this bird's eye view, high angle shot of them, or maybe other refugees, climate refugees, right, escaping, and they have this plank of wood, and with all their valuable possessions floated on top of the plank and pushed away, right? So that's the scene, it's literally the kind of like a post-apocalyptic scene, which we also see in Snowpiercer, right? But then there was a little detail in the river, in the sewage, right? Literally the streets become the sewage, there is a seal. There's a marine animal. I don't know if it's a seal or an otter that's swimming by around those planks. And that seems to be really interesting, that little detail, right? Because it is about the calamity. We know that human world has caused all this problems, in terms of Anthropocene and everything, right? And at the same time, nature in the body of the seal sort of encroaches into this contaminated human world. So there seems to be a really interesting suggestion there, although it remains so flitting and therefore ambivalent, but really pregnant with meanings.
Thank you, Professor Wang. I'm gonna have to cut it a little bit short because we are unfortunately out of time, and I believe this is where present day TikTokers would now say like and subscribe for a part 2. But I'm not going to give a part 2, unfortunately. So my last question to all of my great panelists here tonight, and thank you so much for being here with me, is who do you think is the true parasite of the film? The film is titled Parasite. So what, from your perspective, do you think is a parasite a person, a family? Is it a thing? Is it an entity, a construct? And if you could limit this to 3 sentences or less, that would be perfect.
Well, I think, the beauty of storytelling and filmmaking, is that there are many interpretations. I think the film has minimally a dual layered critique the inability for there to be social mobility, right? This kind of inevitability of unjust class stratification, because the families involved, right, at the narrative level, there's no change. But there's also a way in which, thinking about Professor Wang's notion of scavenging some experiences of pleasure from the very beginning of the film, right? The story, the plan or the non-plan, I mean, it was going to go south. There was not going to be the possibility of a happy ending. And so that speaks to the inability, right, for there to be any kind of justice. But I also think, to answer your question about the parasite, so who's the parasite? So in this scene that we did see, right, it was very horizontal. And it was also a set, by the way, the basement apartment and the streets and the street scenes. So the flooding is happening and there's all this movement and running, right? And they are it was very intestinal, right? The passageways and the hallways, they are in the bowels, literally. And so in some ways, if we're going to take the idea of a camera, the parasites could be the viewers, right? That we're just watching all of this happen. We can feel some moments of self-satisfaction because we awarded it, the Palme d'Or or the Academy Award. And we can say, yes, class stratification is wrong, and then as usual, a film ends and that's that. I mean, nothing ends up changing. So is the parasite really, right, just the viewing and the exiting of the social question at hand?
I mean, I can go. I think a couple sentences about like the parasite who gets to be who is the parasite. I know this is a cop-out answer, but I think like everyone in that, obviously, like at face value, you think like the Kim family is like the parasite. They're just leeching off of like a richer family. But if you think about and deconstruct kind of like the Park family as well, you kind of realize like they wouldn't have survived without like their housekeepers or like their the service workers, basically. Like the mom doesn't know how to cook apparently, and like the dad is just, I guess, too busy to like drive himself. And it's just like kind of thinking about like, like while it's like, oh, it seems like very like face value that like just the Kim family or like the lower income folks are just leeching off the people who have money, kind of like this, idea of like trickle down economic stuff. But like, the Park family is clearly, also doing the same exact thing. Like they wouldn't survive. They just have a bunch of money and they wouldn't survive like doing like day-to-day things without like the people that they hire.
As I was watching, I was thinking about what is the common connection of the individuals who are ultimately killed in the movie, right? It was the housekeeper, the Rebecca, the tutor, the sister, and the husband, right? So it seems to me that those are the three individuals whom the rest of the families are really dependent on. And so I think of Parasite on that level, and also agree with what Professor Kim and Collette has been saying as well.
Yeah, I think adding to kind of Colette's point, as much as the poor families are the parasite on the wealthier ones, like they can't live the life that they want to live, nor can they have the status that they have without this entire system uplifting them. But I think I now want to take on Professor Kim's analogy of the viewer being the parasite. Yeah, I think someone wrote in the chat, LS Kim mic drop, and that was definitely what that moment felt like for me.
So yeah, I definitely think that the idea that viewer being the parasite is a really intriguing idea. So it raises the question of who are the laborers and who are benefiting from other people's labor without reciprocating, right? So in the Orthodox Marxist idea, the rich family will definitely be the parasites because they're benefiting and at the same time they're dismissive of the people who work for them. But these are the people who enable their luxury, everyday luxury and comfort, right? So they would be the parasites. What Bong Joon-ho does is that he entertains no Marxist illusion of proletarian revolution, right? So the underclass people actually fight against each other. So in other words, not only they sort of con into the wealthy family, but they sort of make their living that way, but they also fight against each other over the host, so to speak, right? So ultimately, I think it is left deliberately ambivalent who are the parasites, or maybe everybody is the parasite, and the viewers. I think it really goes back to what we were talking about earlier, how deep and how impactful the film's diagnosis and dissection of the class struggle is, right? Is it something that simply wins some cultural capital for the film on the international stage, and then sort of allow people to pay lip service to the class discourse and then forget about it. And then definitely in that sense, the viewers would be parasites. But then if the viewers take the cue and take it even further to think about how class disparity in all kinds of modalities work, not only in Korea, but also throughout the world, right? If the viewer actually conduct that kind of labor, right? Going back to the issue of labor, if the viewer actually conducts that kind of labor of deep social political investigation and thinking about injustice and ways of getting out of this deadlock, then the viewer hopefully could also be the agent to terminate the parasitic system.
This might be a cop-out answer, more so than Collette's, but I think everyone's kind of correct. Only because I feel like it is kind of a criticism on the capitalist system where people are kind of leeching off each other. So for example, you have on one hand, the Kim family leeching on the richer family because they need their money to survive. Whereas the Park family are kind of leeching off of the Kim family for menial tasks. They're just too lazy to do it. Like they could clean their own, it's not that hard to clean their own clothes and cook for themselves and like do all these different chores that they've hired other people to do. And yeah, I think what's also really interesting is that the idea of the viewer being a parasite as well, because we are deriving entertainment from this movie at the cost of these fictional characters. I mean, obviously they're not real and they're not actually suffering, but like, that there's that thought between us, the viewer, and then the actual film itself and how we are the ones actually getting things from the film.
Yes. Thank you everyone so much for your thoughts on Parasite and unpacking this really deep and moving cinematic wonder. I say that so few about films that I've watched, because I've watched a lot now because I'm a film major and I've watched a lot of films assigned to me in classes and outside of classes, but I really, really love this film. So if you haven't had the opportunity to watch Parasite, I strongly recommend that you do, because it is really an amazing film. I want to take some time now, and I would ask all of you in the chat and those of you who are still here watching our live stream to please thank our esteemed panelists today. Thank them for joining us and taking their time out of their very, very busy schedules to talk with us about what Parasite is and what the film is all about. So I thank you all for being here today. At this time, we are concluding the panel discussion. If you would like, panelists, if you would like to stick around, you are welcome to, but if you need to go, I understand you are welcome to leave at this time. But we will be conducting the raffle now for our participants who signed up for the event. So I will go ahead and give us that break. And thank you again so much, Professors Kim and Wang and Nancy Kim and Collette and Angie and Alex. Thank you so, so much for being here today. I appreciate it so much. Yeah, if you need to go, you are absolutely welcome to go.
Can I, hello, this Mr. Producer over here. Can I request that not, because it will break all of the layout that I have.
Oh.
We'll stick around and we want to see who's going to win the raffle.
Yeah, we want to see who wins the raffle. Even though we're not in it.
Yes, one more thank you and a big, big shout out. I'm so sorry to Christian, our producer, who is a reservation and events assistant over at Colleges 9 and 10 for producing this wonderful panel discussion for you all. Thank you so much for your work, Christian, for all the behind the scenes work. I really appreciate it. And a shout out to one of my supervisors, Jess, for moderating the chat tonight. Thank you so much for doing that. And to all of my friends and coworkers watching, thank you for being here. I will now get in with the raffle. Let's go ahead and spin that wheel. Does it say? I can't read it from here.
It says Sarah Harker, but Sarah Harker is a staff person, right?
Yeah.
Do I need to roll again? Also, you highlighted my video on accident. Okay. Renee Walder.
Awesome. Well, congratulations, Renee. You have won yourself a stuffed peach pillow, just like the peaches in the film Parasite. We will be contacting you shortly after the event. Let's spin that wheel again. Ooh, it's right in between.
That would be Michael Sim.
Oh, yay. Congratulations, Michael. You are the winner of a Amazon Alexa Echo Dot. Yay. Now you can ask her to look up the film Parasite, which is available on Hulu. All right. So one more winner. If we can spin the wheel one more time. Who's it gonna be?
That looks like Connor Hale.
Oh, wow. Congratulations, Connor. You are our final winner, and you are the now proud owner of Korean face masks, straight out of the movie Parasite. Well, congratulations, winners. We will be contacting you after the event is over. We thank you all so much for being here and participating with us. And thank you to everyone who was here tonight. Thank you for engaging with all of us. We appreciate your time and patience through some of the technical difficulties we've had tonight. And yeah, thank you so much for being here. Wish you all a happy rest of your quarter. For those of you not in college anymore, happy rest of the month of February, and wishing you all a happy and good night. Thank you, everyone.
And thank you to Erika.
Thank you.